Welcome to the Growth Bridge. I'm your host, Ivo-Castillo, here in Miami, and this podcast is for entrepreneurs and leaders with strong ties in Latin America who want to understand how founders think about growth, marketing, leadership, and decision making, and how to apply their mindset in your own business. Today, I'm excited to have Paul Adams. He is the founder of Columbia Home Services. Hello, Paul. How are you doing?
Good morning, Ivo. Nice to see you.
Let's start to give some context. Can you tell us a little about your background and what led you get into the home service spaces?
Yeah, so I've been in the trades, and I guess when I say trades, I'm thinking heating and air conditioning, plumbing and electrical for the better part of 30 years. So I started on the electrical side when I began my career and worked a number of years in plumbing. And probably for the last 15 years have been heavily focused in the plumbing and heating and air conditioning space. And I think, the first 3 quarters of my career were focused on working for somebody and companies in this sort of trade space. But the dream was sort of always to be a founder of my own company. And that was sort of the stimulus for creating the thesis for Columbia Home Services to go out and partner with local mom and pop type companies to build an operating culture like we have at Columbia Home Services.
And can you tell us how big is Columbia Home Services? What is it that you guys provide?
Yeah, the journey's been quite remarkable. We started the company back in 2023,
Mhm.
and our approach has been to grow inorganically. So we've acquired 13 companies and completed one merger to stand up our company, which last year did over 165 million in revenue. We operate in 7 states across the US and we have around 1,000 employees. So the inorganic growth has been quite remarkable. And then coupled with the inorganic, we've been trying to grow sales organically on top of what we've acquired. But it's been a great journey. It's what I call organized chaos, because
Yeah.
when you have a lot of different companies and cultures and different mix of business, then it presents challenges. But the dream was realized, looking back and seeing how much we've accomplished in 3+ years.
Yes, that's very remarkable. And that make me curious. How did you come up with that? What is the secret behind it? Because listen, it's not a common thing. And second, have to have a set of skills to pull it off, right?
I don't think I could have pulled it off without having the right people to work with. So, when you think about what was our method to the madness, it was about partnering with the right operators, partnering with the right financial backers. And what we saw in the trade space were generations of legacy business owners that had no exit plan. And so the thesis was really focused on identifying well run legacy brands whereby if we could partner with them, and I don't use the word partner lightly because in our model, when we acquire a business, we often require the seller to stay on for a period of time, help us with the transition so that it has less disruption to the customer base, less disruption to the employee culture, and so that we get more continuity in the way the business has been running. We don't want distract from the change of ownership. So we've seen this sort of problem in the trades where people have run these businesses for generations and they come to an inflection point as to what is my exit plan? And often the trades are probably not handed down to the children of these owners the way they historically were, because there are more options for people to pursue different careers and different things. So the hand-me-down business from your parents is a dilemma for a lot of business owners. And we just
Yes,
happen to identify with that. And I think we very successfully went in. We built relationships with these owners. We talked to them about our model, and we presented something that established an opportunity for that seller to generate what we call generational wealth so that they could step back a little bit from the business, but while stepping back, still preserve the legacy, still be involved and invest in its future. And so that's sort of been the method to the madness. And yes, there are some noticeable changes, but I guess when I describe change, it's more of an improvement because small business owners can only take a business so far. And most of the businesses in the trade space sort of cap out at, call it 5 million in revenue. And there they live and they operate a lifestyle business. What we're trying to do is take a consortium of these small business owners and not keep it a lifestyle business, but make it a true operating culture.
correct. Well, I'm gonna go deeper on your thinking. How? Because you are in an industry that 90%, 85% is dominant by small business owners who operates and is a lifestyle business. And you were, from what I hear from you, just start that way, right? How, what is it? What did you did? What did you study? What did you learn that make you pursue this business model and scale the way you did?
There's no doubt that the trade space, and if we just use heating and air conditioning and plumbing as an example, it's highly fragmented. So there are over 300,000 contractors engaging these type businesses. And that doesn't include Chuck in a truck or Stan in a van. So there are thousands of these people performing these services. But the irony of it is that the demand is far greater than the number of contractors. So I think what's also critical is that the barriers to entry are very, very low. So an owner can start this business. They can go out in their respective communities and sell a service, repair, or an installation that replaces an old system, or they can sell an agreement to maintain somebody's system. And the cost of entry is virtually nil because that individual generally starts in their own truck. And as they develop more customers, they expand and they build these businesses in a very grassroots type of way. And we like the fact that these owners understand and have built their legacy based on the most intimate form of customer service, and that's going into somebody's home. And a lot of these tradesmen understand the business and they provide great service, but where there's a gap is systems, people, meaning not enough people or not the right systems or no systems. And so when you look at the back office of this very fragmented industry, it's very archaic. And so the idea is to professionalize these businesses in their back office while still maintaining that relationship with the customer that the company was founded on, and simultaneously maintain the relationship with their employees, because in a service business, it is about people. You're not making anything. The legacy of the business is based on people. So owners have this deep connection with their installers and their technicians and the people inside the office that answer the phone and talk to the customers every day. And so our model was to identify these really well-run grassroots type of companies, but inject some level of sophistication and professionalism to get the growth, to expand the EBITDA. And this is where a lot of small business owners, again, hit that inflection point where, hey, I'm doing 5 million in revenue. I'm getting a lot of constant repeat business. I have a great existing base of customers I service, but I don't know how to take it to the next level. And that's where we sort of found an equation to professionalize them a bit, introduce some sophistication with the right field management software, the right accounting software, while at the same time taking some of this heavy lift off their back and really allowing them to continue in this new enterprise that they're part of to just focus on the customer and grow sales organically. And then that business should elevate from 5 million to 7 million to 10 million in a much faster ramp period than they experienced previously.
And that make me this question. What are the biggest challenge that you see in the industry today?
Well, there are a number of challenges, but let's just start with the business owner themselves. I mentioned in our model, our intention was to retain the owner to make sure we have continuity. But let's be frank. If you've owned your own business, the transition to working for somebody, for an entrepreneur, is often not part of their DNA. So they struggle with working for somebody else because they've never worked for somebody else. Maybe a father and a mother that were in the business and it was handed down, but for years they've been managing these businesses themselves. And then they reach this point where they're talking to us and they're making a decision. Can I really work for somebody else? And then once they overcome that, and if they can actually make the adjustments, once they're paid for their business, the other embedded challenge is making sure that the foot stays on the gas. Because naturally, when the bank account becomes more flush, people have a tendency to pull back. We also, as we get older, we just naturally pull back. So those two things sort of dictate early on whether the owner is really going to make it and whether we've made the right decision. So then we have to spend an equal amount of time trying to figure out what that succession planning looks like. And then you have all the other challenges that exist for the business. It is the change in the marketing and how it's done today. You have this whole challenge between SEO and ChatGPT, which
Yeah.
historically was never there. You have AI moving at such a rapid pace. You have all these different SaaS systems. So the business challenges are on top of just establishing who is going to lead day to day, and are they going to kind of buy into what a Columbia Home Services wants to do to aid these businesses and grow them.
That's make me this challenging question. Maybe it's happened. How to manage that? How to because lead that? Maybe you are in the middle of the process. You agree with a small business owner to follow the path of Colombia, and then you realize that it doesn't work, right? It ever happened? I know it's
It's
you need a contract and everything and legal stuff, but like you said, it's a people thing also.
Yeah, we we
How
we we
manage
we
that?
make we've made mistakes,
Yeah.
and roll-up strategies make a lot of these mistakes. I think one of the things that we've done to try to counter that, you know, propensity to make that mistake is doing a proper leadership assessment, right? So when you're doing the diligence, one of the things that we've kind of experimented with is the culture index. And it's a quick 5-10 minute assessment, and what it does is it enables us to paint a picture on how this person thinks and operates. So when I did my culture index, there are, one word descriptors, and I'm what they call a rainmaker. And so a rainmaker profile is very sales oriented, very deal oriented, and it suits my style. I wasn't surprised when I saw it. When I look at my son's culture index, he's very cerebral, financially astute, mathematically inclined. He was an administrator
Yeah.
under the culture index. Now, his first reaction to that was, well, that sounds weak. No, it's not weak, because every business or large
Mhm.
business needs administrators, they need rainmakers, they need trailblazers, they need scholars. And I said to my son, there's a lot of things that come out of this profile that give an indication to whoever's investing in you where you're going to participate, accelerate, and what you're going to potentially contribute to the business. And you see, if the profile itself was on every door or every office door, and people could see what I was or what he is before they walked in, the dynamic of working with that individual would probably change because people would have more insight as to this is the way this person thinks. I might need to adjust. And I thought it was very interesting when I learned about this culture index because, as we look at sellers, we look at these great businesses, great brands, great financial performance, but let's be frank, we don't always know who the individual is. So I think calibrating, you know, the diligence to assess leadership competencies, what are the towering strengths? What are the areas of weakness potentially? What is their true entrepreneurial aptitude? What's their learning agility, right? Are they the active learner that's kind of out of the box? Are they the sort of, passive learner? Are they kind of a blocked learner?
Yeah.
And so, these things are part of the diligence process that sometimes are often missing in deals. And they're actually really the catalyst for how things are going to actually turn out because the people whose business you're buying, they already have the functional and technical skills to do the work. It's evident in the
Yeah.
numbers. But when
Yes.
you ask to take it to another level, this is where the focus on leadership has to be much greater and making sure that they possess or whatever indication of previous behavior is going to really kind of be how they act in the future. And you got to know what you're dealing with. And that's not always the case because people can tell you what you want to hear. But being a little bit more objective on the leadership assessment up front, I think makes the deal far more successful. Look, I'm not advocating or saying that I've done it right the
Yeah.
whole time.
No, no. Yeah. I know.
I think if I look back, I've made some comments around how important it is to assess leadership during these diligence sessions with these owners. I think if I were consistent in looking at leadership and I stuck to some very regimented acquisition criteria, and look, where we started and where we are very different. Our guardrails for doing deals have gotten tighter as we've gotten bigger because we can afford to be a bit more choosier about the deals. But if I'm focusing on the leadership aspect, and for every 10 deals I look at, if I really did an objective leadership review and I looked at sort of the succession planning of that business, I might do one out of every 10. But to be fair, it's hard to answer that question when you're trying to get in business because that's the hardest thing. So when we started, we probably didn't spend as much time, but as we've learned and
Yeah.
experienced by working with these small mom and pop businesses and the owners, we've kind of rethought our acquisition criteria and become a bit more regimented on what we need to be successful because we throw a lot of things at them because it's hard not to. It's hard not to want to change. It's hard not to want to fuel the business. It's hard not to want to grow because that's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
So the rate of change will always be there. I think the challenge for us, it's the pace at which you change. And so what's critical to find out is when you're assessing the leaders in diligence, you need to kind of understand their adaptation to change and whether they can foster it and whether they can implement it. And any indication that that's going to be a challenge should be a red flag. And while they may fire on a lot of cylinders, they're not firing on all the cylinders in your criteria. It begs the question, is it money well spent? Because what ends up happening is if you buy a business and it doesn't work out, that means the multiple you paid for the business goes up and the EBITDA that you've acquired goes down. That's not a really good recipe for a deal.
Correct. Correct. Or what have you seen or tried to accomplish in Colombia? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Most companies struggle more with getting leads or handling the work when it's come to it.
Well, historically, work came to the contractor through quality craftsmanship. So in a community, these relationships with contractors were handed down from generation to generation because families trusted those contractors. And so referrals is how these businesses grew historically. But as time has changed, often contractors are slow to change. So they done what they've always done and they've gotten what they've always gotten. And so that's why they cap out at that sort of maybe 5 million in revenue. Nowadays, the way we go about acquiring a customer is different. So, marketing, which is historically less than 3% of revenue for any one of these business, probably closer to 1.5%. It's very archaic traditional marketing. And there's this reluctance to market because so much business historically came through referrals. That's what they've relied on. But the digital marketing and social media and everything is revolutionized and changed the way marketing is done. And so these businesses have really struggled with embracing those changes. And when they got over the hump to invest a little bit more of their revenue in social media, maybe it's Facebook, maybe it's Instagram, maybe it's LSA, GMB, SEO, you name it. Now you've hit this really critical point where you're paying all this money for leads because you can't really cold call on the customer. So you're
Oh,
paying for money for leads on Google, but now you have the threat of ChatGPT. And when a customer goes into ChatGPT and they say, I would like to replace my heating and air conditioning system, it's not taking you as the contractor and all that SEO you've been paying for and putting you at the top of the page, is it? ChatGPT is aggregating data and giving something else to the customer that doesn't come from Google.
yeah,
So this whole evolution of change is something that the digital marketing agencies are wrestling with. But
correct,
the downward effect on us is critical because we're not getting the lead volume that we used to get. So
correct.
remember, we got over the hump of just relying on referrals. We started doing digital marketing and we started to see our leads increase. But then some other new technology like ChatGPT came out in AI, and that's taken away from Google. Now we got to shift over here. So this is a dilemma for home services. How do we sort of move with the times, and who will be first to develop tools within the AI world that we can now adopt that maybe run simultaneously or in some way work with the traditional way of marketing through Google and SEO and PPC so that we can maintain progress at growing organically. But I think what we've seen, and this is again my opinion, we've seen less lead volume because the digital marketing world is a little bit in flux with AI.
Yes, that's right. And but as a business, you have to constantly try to get leads, right? What usually happens when after a leads come in? Where do things start to break or
Well,
not?
leads are generated really two ways in our industry. You have leads that are coming in, and then you have call volume going out that's trying to generate leads.
Correct.
So we're measuring our conversion, meaning if a lead comes in, are we answering the phone within X amount of time? Are we giving the customer what they need, whether it's electronically or through voice? And then are we able to establish an estimate or a quote? And when we do that, are we giving the customer choices, good, better, best? And then are we able to close that business with the customer? So that's all inbound. The outbound is learning how to embrace AI, to have it comb your field management software to look for opportunities with customers or meaning your existing base to place outbound call volume using AI agents or bots to
Correct.
start to generate conversations with customers that are very human like. For example, an algorithm for a bot goes into your field management system and it says, Mr. and Mrs. Adams had a system installed 8 years ago. It's probably at the end of its useful life. Let's have an outbound call, text, or email to the customer to engage on that and remind them we put in your system 8 years ago. The useful life of the system is almost expired. Probably not a bad idea to have us come out and take a look. Customer interacts with that text, email, or phone call, but at the end, it's a bot that's doing it. And then that secures an appointment. And now you're sending a human out to the location to look at the status of the system, to detect if there are any leaks or subcooling or subheating. And then what we're trying to do is, maybe redo the load calculation to determine whether the house has the right tonnage. And then we're presenting the customer with options and we're trying to close that business. And we use tools like third-party financing and leasing in order to close that business with the customer. And that's sort of how we're handling the inbound, outbound. But, traditionally somebody was doing it, a human was calling in or a human was calling out.
Yeah.
Now customers are liaising with us via text or email. And they don't want to talk to anybody. And then we know that after hours, there are generations of buyers that are searching for these services at hours that we're not staffed. So we have to
Yeah.
figure out how to answer that dilemma. And the only
Yes.
way you can do that is by embracing AI and embedding it in the way you manage so that you can deliver service to these customers 24/7.
I assuming you have all that figured out because
No, I don't have it all figured out. I just know.
I mean, I mean, in, I mean, in, I mean, is there is you have pretty much map out, and I guess you have these systems put in place for your companies for
Well,
this.
I think what we've done, to be fair, I think we have the right people in the right seats doing the work that really matters at Columbia. We have young operational leaders and finance people and marketing people that were educated on these tools before they even came out. Like they were ahead of the game. So we have generations of people that are working at Columbia Home Services that understand this and they're embracing it. It's part of their DNA. It wasn't part of the way I was raised in the business. So these people are stepping up and they are working with these suppliers and vendors and they understand the technology and they're working diligently to fit it in to the Columbia Home Services puzzle as something that we can use day to day to make us more efficient. Because the way I'd like to sort of leave you with my understanding of AI in our industry is that it is not intended to replace people. It is intended to make people more efficient. And I think our people sort of embrace that because they understand at the core of what we do, it involves a person, but people could be a lot more efficient. And so I think they understand that. So they're attacking it from the right vantage point. How do I make this service tech, really, really efficient when they're with the customer? And that's arming them with the right tools and equipment. That's arming them with the right SaaS software. That's giving them the ability to be supported by AI so they don't have to do the minutia that maybe previously they once did before. And so I think that that's where we have a competitive advantage because we've invested in our leadership and we've got a lot of young people that have these technical and functional skills that should elevate the way we operate and it should translate to
And to our audience, and because of course every industry is dealing with the same thing, okay, and that is for me what I have seen in all my interviews. Where do you think most of the company lose opportunities when without realizing it?
Well, I said it earlier. I think the pace of change is where a lot of companies make the mistake. So having young, smart, talented people, well educated, people that know the industry, that's all great. But those people can still make a fundamental mistake by moving way too fast. So there's a lot to be said for baby steps. There's a lot to be said for sequencing how you implement things, how much, when, to whom, to stack rank. Like there are some fundamental things that have to happen. And it doesn't matter what generation you come from, you could make that same mistake. So I think slower integration and more methodical integration makes far more sense than trying to bite off more than you can chew. So, yes, you'll have a tech stack and you'll have a strategy to get the right tech stack in there to make the business more efficient. But at the end of the day, the users have to adopt, and your rate of adoption is very, very critical to the way you operate. You could have a world-class system, but when we do diligence on a lot of these companies and you look at their utilization of, let's say, a field management software, often they pay for a very expensive system, but the vendor evaluates their usage or their implementation of that software, and they can determine and educate us that their utilization is quite low. So it begs the question, why put the software in if your utilization is not going to go up? So change, we've been talking about it for centuries. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. But at the rate at which you create different ways of doing things, you just have to be a bit more deliberate. I think a little bit slower and more methodical. And when you feel or sense the pushback, that's when you have to pull back and ask yourself objectively, what is the reason we're not getting the adoption?
And
Because
one of
remember what I said, the end users are using this software. The software is not replacing people. So the adoption is the human.
yes, and I like always say to my clients and the people who ask me is you have to step back a little bit and understand that not all of tools and AIs going to work for your business. Not It's not a matter of tools, it's a matter of systems. Figure out your flow, your needs, your system, and then you look for it, what you're gonna improve and be more efficient about it, right?
Well,
And
that's part
because
of
it's
it, but
not
the other part is AI is happening so fast that these AI products I view as islands, and it's very difficult for a company to manage all these different islands because
yes,
there's AI for outbound calling, inbound calling, for customer service, for marketing, and they're not all working together just yet. So AI is great, but how many AI islands can you manage efficiently in order to have real positive impact on your business? I think you have to be very selective on where you're going to try out AI, and you have to vet it. And then you have to think about, if you continue to add AI tools, how is the tech stack actually function?
yes, correct. Yes, because it's not just putting things on top of each other without solving anything. And sometimes, okay, because hey, listen, if you want to your AI works better, you have to be on it. You have to give the inputs. You have to prompt properly. So you have to still have take some time and invest time in your AI. So when I see it is okay, I will have outbound AI for outbound for leads, outbound for AI agent. And then you spend more time, taking care of the AI, taking care of the flow that's supposed to be in your business. So in the end, you're not solving anything,
So that's
right?
why you have to put a governor or a regulator on your enthusiasm,
Yeah.
because there's so many great things that are happening day to day, but you have to have something that pulls you back and says, whoa, how much can we actually afford to do? What is sort of the most important things to do? And from there, be disciplined enough to stack rank and then figure out, what is going to be the tool you're going to use, what is the communication plan for this change. And then you have to be what I always call relentlessly boring about it. That if you're going to invest in it, you have to continue to reinforce it so that it follows through in the adoption of it. And from there,
Correct.
you should start to see results. But again, baby steps.
And that's happening with every single technology also, is the adoption about it. It's just if you don't willing to, like you said, boring and push it and do it once and establish as an habit, is that's happening with a lot of technology and business owners. When it came to Slack and when it came to email first, and then everybody started to, what? I'm not doing email because or send one email and then they don't check the email back then. I'm talking to you about the 90s, right? There was the big thing, right? And everything is just adoption and pushing it and be part of the a habit or be part of the system that everybody have to use it. Everybody have to uh, rely on it, right? And also for that to happen, it has to have leadership and somebody who leader that. Paul, two more questions. If you could fix one thing on your business, what it will be?
That's an important question because I think there are a lot of competing interests. I would say that in the life cycle of a company, revenue cures a lot of problems. And I think my focus would be clearly to establish a sales culture that is far more organized in how we present options to the customer. So when I think of how expensive things are, I'm an advocate that customers need to understand what are the alternative methods other than cash to pay for a system. And this sounds like a very fundamental issue, but when you think about 80+% of what gets sold in our industry being sold from a technician, it's not being sold from a professional salesperson. So often the technician is balancing what they know, what they've been trained on, and what they're there to maybe fix or remedy with presenting the customer with a very wholesome estimate quote. So bifurcating between technician selling and professional selling is very, very important. And I think it's something that continually needs focus more so than a lot of other things, because if sales are coming in, it gives you the ability as a company to do a lot more and fix a lot more things. So that answers the back half of this question is if you get the sales right, you can then prioritize a lot of operational things that need to be fixed. But if sales is not working and you're not converting on your leads, then that is a problem. And it's a recipe for disaster because you will continually get mediocre to flat growth. And when you're thinking about building an operating culture or you're thinking about selling your company, you have to be able to demonstrate that you've had sustained organic growth. So if there's one thing that keeps me up at night is every time I look at our performance, is if the sales are not there, then it is a strong indication that something needs to continually be improved.
And what do you do?
Well, I think what our team it's not what I'm doing. Our team is far smarter than I am, but what they're
Yeah.
doing is they're developing up front an organic playbook, and they're
Okay.
trying to standardize the way they present options to the customer in every market. They are standardizing the way we go to market with our marketing efforts. When you standardize, and again, I come back to being relentlessly boring about it. If you do the same things, people say you'll get the same results, but like there is something to be said for being regimented, a bit autocratic about how you present things to the customer. Is the customer aware that they can get it financed? Is the customer aware that there's a leasing option? Is the customer aware that there's a zero down option? Is the customer aware that there's a rebate available from the US government or from the manufacturer? All these things, our team are trying to standardize and present to the people that are selling our products and services so that we're more consistent. If you're more consistent, you will grow sales. If you're inconsistent at the presentation, then you will get
Yeah.
less sales. So I think, I talked earlier about in our M&A world, we have criteria and we have guardrails. You almost need to put up the criteria by which you're going to present to the customer, and you have to have guardrails, meaning you have to have price floors. Like you can't just discount things ad nauseum. You have to educate the customer on their ways to pay for it. But we're in this to make money. And so we have to educate our salespeople on presentations to the customers that are consistent and that they have options and that these options are profitable options for the company, but not in such a way that it's perceived as being predatory or anything like that. So our teams are working hard at being professional in the trades. And I think that that's something that needs to continually improve over time because, again, historically, we were less sophisticated, less professional in the way we generated quotes and estimates to the customer. And that's all changing because technology is changing. And technology should improve the way customers convert.
Well, Paul, this has been amazing talk. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for watching this episode. See you next time.